Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the really fascinating history behind what is arguably one of the most influential science fiction stories ever told. We're going to look at exactly how a single story morphed from this shocking Victorian novel into a massive media phenomenon that literally changed the way we consume entertainment.
So you've probably heard the legend, right? Did a radio show really cause nationwide hysteria back in 1938? I mean, we've all heard the stories of people running absolutely terrified into the streets, totally convinced that Martians were attacking. But to understand what actually went down that night and why that myth is still so enduring today, we really need to rewind the clock back to where the panic truly began.
Okay, let's set the scene. It all started in the late 19th century. 1898 to be exact. Author H.G. Wells unleashed a terrifying Martian invasion upon the completely unsuspecting horse and cart society of Victorian England. I want you to picture this, a world with no lasers, no tanks, where people communicated by telegraph and got around by train or on horseback. And into this quiet, very respectable world, Wells just drops an absolute nightmare.
And the impact of that novel is absolutely still being felt today. Academic scholars are constantly studying this work, and not just as a thrilling piece of fiction, but as a really deep commentary on human vulnerability. You have to remember, Wells was writing this at a time when the British Empire was rapidly expanding. So he flipped the script. He essentially asked his readers, what if we were the ones being colonized by a superior force? He even directly referenced how the British wiped out the Tasmanians, which really forced his readers to take a hard look in the mirror.
Section 1. The Victorian Alien Invasion. The shock of the first extraterrestrial attack. So here's how this terrifying plot escalates. A strange, glowing cylinder opens up in a public park called Horsell Common, and it unleashes these bear-sized creatures with snake-like tentacles. They quickly build these colossal, 100-foot-high walking tripods that just completely devastate London with poisonous gas and heat rays. And it all builds up to this incredible scene where a British ironclad, the Thunderchild, valiantly sacrifices itself to destroy 2 of the tripods so it can save refugees who are escaping on boats to Belgium.
But here's the kicker. Humanity's weapons fail entirely. The army, the navy, literally nothing can stop these Martians. Ultimately, mankind's saviors turn out to be the humblest things on Earth, microscopic bacteria. The Martians suffer this massive self-defeat simply because they don't have an immune system to fight off our everyday pathogens. It's just such a brilliant twist, right? The very smallest things on Earth end up saving us from the greatest threat.
Moving on to Section 2, Predicting Modern Warfare, the terrifying scientific foresight of H.G. Wells. Guys, Wells was just incredibly ahead of his time here. He accurately predicted the concept of lasers with his heat ray, literally decades before the technology was even envisioned. And his heavy, poisonous black smoke was a really chilling precursor to the mustard gas that would later be used in World War I. But get this is probably my favorite fact. A 16-year-old boy named Robert H. Goddard read this novel, was super inspired by the space cylinders, and then spent his entire life inventing rockets. That's the research that eventually culminated in the Apollo moon landings. Just wild.
Section 3. The Radio Panic Myth. Debunking the 1938 Orson Welles broadcast.
Now, writer Howard Koch penned this incredibly immersive script for the Mercury Theater on the Air. And instead of just doing a straight reading of the book, they formatted the whole thing to sound exactly like a live news broadcast of an actual alien invasion happening in real time across New York and New Jersey. You can literally feel the tension in those words. It caught a lot of people completely off guard, mostly because radio was still a pretty new format for delivering breaking news.
But about that massive nationwide panic where millions of people supposedly rioted and jumped out of windows, yeah, that's largely a myth. The reality is actually much more cynical. See, the newspaper industry absolutely loathed the radio for stealing their audience and their advertising dollars. And because this broadcast ran late at night, right close to printing deadlines, sensationalist journalists basically took a tiny amount of local confusion and blew it wildly out of proportion. They did it to smear radio's credibility, basically claiming that radio was polluting the public with outrageous lies. Section 4, A Tragic Reality in Ecuador. The 1949 broadcast that ended in disaster. 7. That is the tragic number of people who died because of a 1949 Spanish-language rebroadcast in Quito, Ecuador. Now, this version was so convincing that it actually did set off a real panic. But the tragedy is, when the citizens finally realized the broadcast was just fiction, that panic morphed into absolute fury. Hundreds of people rioted, they attacked the radio station, and they burned it straight to the ground. It really is a sobering reminder of the very real power of media manipulation. And that brings us to Section 5, the endless adaptations, how the War of the Worlds continues to evolve. As you track its evolution, you see how much the story morphed far beyond those Victorian roots. For instance, we got a 1953 film that relocates the action all the way from London to California, and it swaps the main journalist character out for a physicist. Then, and this is quite unique, it becomes a 1978 prog rock musical featuring this iconic holographic narration by Richard Burton. And finally, of course, we get Steven Spielberg's massive 2005 blockbuster featuring Tom Cruise playing a desperate father trying to survive in Boston. What's really fascinating here is how every single adaptation kind of shifts the narrative to act as a mirror for the anxieties of its specific era. The 1953 film taps directly into Cold War paranoia and this deep fear of the other. It even spawned a super quirky 1988 TV sequel where those original aliens didn't actually die but woke up from suspended animation to merge into human bodies. Meanwhile, the 2005 Spielberg film cleverly sidesteps that whole old cold virus ending so it can focus almost entirely on this visceral post-9/11 survivalism and a father's drive to protect his family at all costs. As we wrap up this explainer today, I want to leave you with a thought, and this is inspired straight from a quote by Wells's own narrator. Before the invasion truly hits in the book, he compares humanity to the dodo bird, just sitting respectably in its nest, arrogantly thinking it can just peck the invading sailors to death tomorrow. So, I have to ask, whether we're facing fictional aliens, real-world media manipulation, or just microscopic bacteria, are we truly prepared for the next unexpected threat, or are we just complacent birds waiting in the nest? Thanks so much for joining me today, and keep questioning the world around you.